Hi, I'm Sarah Hartman. Welcome to our Chocolate Masters Hangouts. Today we're going to dig into the meaning of sustainability in the cocoa and the fine chocolate industry. Please know that our discussion today is focused on the fine chocolate industry and fine flavor cacao, and not the huge multinational chocolate confectionery industry as we can't speak for them. And I would like to welcome to the discussion our guest cacao and chocolate expert, Ed Seguine, from Seguine Cacao, Cocoa, and Chocolate Advisors, who is a consultant to Guitar Chocolate Company.
Hi, everybody. Good to be here.
And our guest chocolate maker, Sean Askinosi from Askinosi Chocolate.
Hi, thank you, Sarah.
So one of the definitions used to describe sustainability, which was laid out by the World Commission on Environment and Development in 1987, says that sustainability is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And based on the World Cocoa Foundation's sustainability principles of people, planet, and profits, one of the main issues of cocoa sustainability today is focused on the economic viability of the farmer. So let's start by talking about fine flavor cacao farming. And there are a variety of cacao farming methods around the world today. There is the Cabruca system in Brazil. There's planted and planned agroforestry systems, and monocrop systems planted with or without shade support. Ed, could you tell us a little bit more about each one of those systems, how they compare in terms of production yields, and their impacts on both the environment as well as the livelihood of their farmers?
Sure. As all of you know, the cacao tree evolved in the ancient rainforest as an understory crop, so it was built in the first place to handle shade. However, recent work has shown that it also can handle sun rather well. This is an important consideration. In Cabruca, you do a light thinning of an original rainforest and then interplant the cocoa trees where you can as an understory. As a result, the trees tend to be both spread apart as well as they get very limited light. They get the kind of light that they would have had in the ancient Amazon rainforest in which they evolved. Stepping up from that, you get into agroforestry systems, including some complex systems like the so-called Nelder fan, where you have a fan structure and are planting a number of different crops all at the same time, frequently in succession, with cocoa being simply one of them, planted with cassava, planted with melons, pineapple, including timber trees and other high-value trees. Those will give you a higher yield than the Cabruca simply because the cocoa is planted a little more densely, and it's planted in a managed structure. The next step up from that is a monocrop planting where you're using forest shade to provide some diffuse shade for the trees. And then finally, we have full sun plantings. Most of the world's fine flavor cacao is coming somewhere from either Cabruca or a little bit of agroforestry, because that's just now starting. And then finally, it's getting most of the supply is coming from shade-grown cocoa, although some does come from full sun. The challenge in all of this is the amount of sunlight that the tree receives will determine how many pods the tree produces. And as far as we know, there is no relationship, at least within the yield range that we see in the world today. There is no relationship between the flavor and the yield of the trees. That's under genetic control and with sunlight.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit more about maybe how they compare in terms of the production yields? Which ones produce more, which ones produce less?
Well, it's very clear. The ones that produce more will be full sun planting as long as it has enough rain and enough soil nutrition. So the soil nutrition is absolutely critical, but that's true in all cases.
Mm-hmm.
The lowest productivity will be the cabruca. On the other hand, biodiversity, the amount of animal life that you find, is highest in cabruca and lowest in full sun planting.
Mm-hmm.
What is interesting though, cacao, even with full sun planting or sun and shade trees, that is a better carbon sequestration deal than pasture or any other crop that we know of. Some work done by Eduardo Somariba at Cartier a number of years ago delved into that and has some pretty impressive results. So cacao is good for the environment from the get-go, and you can choose what degree of environmental impact you wish to have.
How about how long the trees live in these different systems?
That's a difficult challenge, because if you look at some of the, I'll call it wild cocoa trees, trees that are found in the unexplored river basins that are part of the origins of cacao, some trees can get to be extremely old. Of course, the tree is actually designed almost to be eternal. And by that I mean, if the center trunk dies, the cocoa tree is exquisitely equipped to send up all of these chupons that will become new trees. And so I have seen cocoa trees that I estimate might be as old as several hundred years. It's not the same original tree, because that long ago rotted away in the center. From a productive standpoint, which is perhaps more relevant, because from the standpoint of farmers, they're not interested in producing leaves and wood. They need to produce pods because that's their livelihood. From that point of view, the economic value of the cocoa tree in terms of its yield will be shortest with full sun planting, and you'll need to replant somewhere around 20 years of age. It will be a little bit longer in an agroforestry system, and longest yet in something like a cabruca or heavily shaded cacao planting. Could be as long as a 40-year cycle with a very shallow, slow decline. It will be very dependent on soil health and nutrition. Notice it's not just nutrients, it's soil health. It's the carbon level, how loose and water retaining is the soil.
So you have many years of experience on the ground, and you've clearly seen firsthand the real issues that are faced by cacao farmers today. What is the main issue that you find, and what should consumers be concerned about?
Well, from the standpoint of the farmer, and I want to focus on that, from the standpoint of the farmers just aren't getting enough money for their crop. And the impact that that is having is from the standpoint, and let's talk sustainability. We want a crop, and your definition is a good one. We want a crop that's going to be around here for the next generation. The challenge of most farmers today is they do not want their children to be cacao farmers, and their children don't want to be cacao farmers because they're not making an adequate enough living. And I know that there are a lot of people that use the metric and like to point to farmers getting older. The reality is farmers are not getting older. They have always been old. It is the old guys like me that still own the land. It's only when they pass it along, either for their own death or choose to get out of it, that they give it to their kids. But the real challenge that we face now is, again, the need that we have an excited new generation that want to be cacao farmers.
And today there are many different certifications available to cacao growers. And it is really hard to know as consumers if any of these certifications impacts the environment, which in turn will impact the sustainability of the farm and of the farmer. Sean, what role does organic certification play in the environmental sustainability of a cacao farm?
I'm really glad that you asked this question about certifications, because there's a lot of discussion about certifications by third parties, not just organic certification, but all kinds of certifications in the industry, both among small craft chocolate makers like myself and even the large industrial chocolate makers around the world discuss certifications. But specifically with regard to organic certification, I've been buying cocoa beans directly from farmers for about 8 or 9 years now, and none of the beans that we've ever purchased have been certified organic. And the contracts that we have with farmers would specify that chemicals and pesticides not be used on the beans, but we've not gone to the level of seeking organic certification. And frankly, in terms of the craft chocolate industry generally, and in terms of my own business specifically, I don't believe that it's important. I do think that organic farming is important, but the certification of organic farming is not that critical to me. I'm not going to discount that it might be a marketing plus for my company, but it's not something that is in its current structure important. And frankly, I think that the organic certification process is difficult for smallholder farmers. And I think that for loosely organized groups of smallholder farmers, that there should be a more affordable way for their crops to be certified organic. And I know that there would be other technologically feasible ways that that could happen. But I think especially for those organic crops to be certified, at least right now, it's not feasible, and it's not something that we're pursuing. With respect to other, you didn't really directly ask, maybe it's coming later, about other certifications. It's so interesting to me that the certifying industry has become bigger and bigger and bigger. Certifying, you can be certified for anything. You can be a B corporation. You can be fair trade. You can be Fair for Life. You can be Rainforest Alliance. You can be, I'm sure I'm missing some, but I have a problem with it. And the reason I have a problem with it is because where is the end? At some point, there needs to be this acceptance of, because when you're bragging about the certification that you have on your chocolate bar, then that is dependent on the credibility of the certifying party and of the information that you provide to the certifying party and to the auditing procedures that they have, and ultimately that consumers believe it. And of course, the ultimate, we hope that these are there, are to promote some sort of social or environmental or economic end for people in the world. And I have a problem with almost all of them. You don't see our chocolate bars certified fair trade. You will not see them certified fair trade. They're not Rainforest Alliance. They won't be. I'm not a B corporation. I don't have anything against it. We are who we are, and regardless of the size that we become, I'm not going to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on certifying. And you're probably going to say, well, why are you kosher certified? Well, my last name is Ashkenazi. My grandfather was Ashkenazi, so that's why I did it.
So at the very onset of what you've been speaking about, you mentioned directly traded cacao, which is the approach that you have in your business. Can you tell us maybe a little bit more about it, how that works? And also, do you think that direct cacao is the best sustainable way to ensure that farmers get a fair price for their cocoa beans?
That's an awesome question. I love that question. And here's the thing. You just used two words that I wish I could, they're overused by me. and it's direct cacao, direct trade. What does that mean? I don't even know what it means, and I supposedly do it. I really, and so people throw that phrase around. I've seen it on websites. I know people who, make chocolate in their kitchen and they sell it to a little shop down the street, and they say it's direct trade cacao. Well, I mean, I really don't know what it means. Where I got it was from Intelligentsia Coffee, and they, in my opinion, were pioneers of this movement in the mid-90s in coffee. And really, when you boil it down, there's an aspect of transparency in the supply chain. And so your question, in some ways, is a little bit loaded when you say, is it the best sustainable? Then I think we get to a point where we really need to narrow down what is sustainable with respect to this application, the application of buying an agricultural product from a cocoa farmer. What is sustainable? And that will be probably a different definition than the one that you used at the beginning of the show. And so I think that's a question. And then I think that the idea of what's best for the farmer, in my opinion, number one, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but it's transparency in the supply chain. Normally when people think of direct trade, they think of shortening the supply chain. That is, paying more directly to the farmer and cutting out, hopefully, other people in the supply chain that are skimming money off, and in many cases for good reason, because they're performing a service. Let's say, for example, that they drive the truck from the farm to the port. Well, they get paid some money. They're in the supply chain. Should there not be somebody driving the truck to the port? Of course. Is that a middleman? Yes. But that's kind of necessary because we haven't figured out how to transform matter into energy and back into matter again. So that has to happen. Now, what if the farmers, though, could rent a truck and they could figure out a way to get it to the port? Would that be better? Yeah, that'd probably be better. What if the farmers could open a bank account and they could receive the money and cut out the middle person who's doing the currency exchange? Would that be better? Yes, it would be better. That's what we do. We teach farmers how to open bank accounts. Would it be better if the farmer could learn how to actually be the legal exporting entity from their country? You bet. In coffee, it doesn't happen very often. Why? Because the supply chain in coffee is very mature. It's a very, very mature, sophisticated supply chain. But I can give one example in the Philippines where we buy beans. We have had the opportunity to teach that farmer group how to become their own exporter. So there's no exporter for them to pay as of our last crop shipment. So that, to me, is the best way, and that is, can the farmers that are there on the farm learn other skills to add value to the crop that they're exporting? So can they learn should they just sell wet beans to somebody who is going to buy them and make great stuff? No, I mean, I don't think that's what's best. It's certainly a way to do it. It could be very efficient. But I think it would be better if the farmers group together and they learn the skills of fermentation and drying and form a group, and then they learn how to be paid, and they learn how to become more efficient and how they maintain the crops and post-harvest. Mm-hmm. That's all adding value, because I have to pay more money for that when they do that well. Mm-hmm. And then, as I said, when the supply chain can be shortened and they learn how to do it, that's best for them. And I want to echo what Ed said at the beginning, and I think this is something that we should have. I think there should be an entire show on this, and I want to repeat what he said again. Farmers need to be paid more money for this crop. We can impose our own Western ideals and say, oh, well, we're the great white American saviors or Canadian saviors or whatever coming to solve all these issues, and you can say we're trying to impose our own economic ideas. No. The bottom line is they need to make more money for this. And when Ed said that the younger, there will be, one of the questions is, will farmers want to do this in the future? I think one of the incentives for farmers to want to work on this kind of a crop is to get more money for it. And that means that our chocolate bars are going to be more expensive. And they should be. They should be a lot more expensive.
Sean, there are a couple things you've said that really strike me in this. First of all, when we talk, regardless of what you call it, direct cacao or whatever, there may be a lot of different models, but it boils down to one very fundamental point. It is building a one-to-one relationship between the chocolate manufacturer that's going to convert the beans and has customers, and the people on the ground who are making this product, who are growing it, taking care of the land, taking care of the environment, and transforming this natural phenomenon into something magical, even ephemeral, the flavor that we know and love as these fine flavor chocolates. But it boils down to a relationship, and in addition to adding value and allowing the farmer to capture the value that's in the value chain that you've just described, there's something else that's going on. By allowing farmers to participate in these kinds of processes, we make the farmer not just a farmer, but an entrepreneur. And I think that that has some real value and interest to the younger generation. I see it in my own kids.
I think that's exactly right. And I think when you talk about relationship, it also does something that's interesting for the chocolate makers like myself. I become transformed by this exposure and this relationship with the people who are growing this crop. When I travel, so you can say direct trade. Well, one of the things that we do is we go there. I'm going to Honduras, Ecuador, Tanzania, Philippines, and traveling to these places every year, and I have the chance to experience the most wonderful hospitality that I've ever experienced in my entire life, that I wouldn't trade for the world. And if I was just picking up the phone and calling a broker in New York, I wouldn't have that chance. I wouldn't have the chance to spend the night in the home of a farmer that I'm buying cocoa beans from. And I think that's a good point, Ed, about the relationship. And that, and that's in 2 weeks we're bringing 15 high school students to Tanzania, and this will be our third such trip, and they get to experience that too. Their lives will be transformed because of this direct trade relationship that we have with farmers. They're going to get to experience that hospitality too. It's funny, young kids, they think, that they're going over to help the people in Africa, and they're going to help the farmers and the students and stuff. You know who gets helped? We do. We get helped. We receive so much more from this relationship and from this experience than we give. And sometimes we even feel guilty about it. The transformation occurs in us. And that, to me, is the most exciting. And let me say, Sarah, this direct trade thing that we're talking about, I had a pretty stressful career before I started this. I was a criminal defense lawyer. I specialized in murder cases.
Oh.
Those are stressful. That was a very stressful life. But direct trading with farmers on 4 continents as the owner of a small company is the most professionally challenging thing that I've ever done in 25 years.
Wow.
This is why I don't have hair. It's gray. If you were to have a slide right here, before I started this, I had a full head of dark brown hair. I didn't, in chocolate years, look at me. In chocolate years, I'm like 80. I'm really 30. But, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard work. It's hard to do. But aren't relationships are hard.
Yes, absolutely.
Relationships are hard.
Absolutely.
So, but I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade it, though.
So let me take it back a little bit to the economics of the farm, which is definitely, as you said, deserves its own show. But in both your experiences, how much does a small cacao family farm make in an average year? And I guess I'll throw that again since the theme is sustainability, is that a sustainable economic model to provide for the farmer and their children into the future?
Well, to set the basis, let me ask for the slides, because we've got a few slides here that I think will show our audience a little more clearly what we're talking about in terms of sustainability. First of all, let's make some assumptions that we're talking about an average typical farmer, maybe a little bit better than average, 3.5 hectares. yielding about 450 kilograms per hectare, which is a little bit more than world average. In terms of their output, what you're seeing here is the output. We'll take the next slide. Now, we just hit recently on the 15th, we just hit one of the short-term highs in the spot market, $3,182, $3,182 per metric ton. It's actually backed off from that the last 2 days, but this is a short-term high. This gives you a feel for the amount of total annual income, key, annual income the farmer is getting from his or her 3.5 hectares. Now, remember, this is a high with typical yields that are in the world a little bit better. Let's do the next slide to put this in perspective. Assuming that the farmer has a family of 4 children, he and his wife, that's 6 members of the family, so they're living off of just over $2 per person per day in the year. That is not very much. Let's put this in further perspective, though. Next slide. The Millennium Development Goals define extreme poverty as $1.25 per person per day. The cocoa farmer is not much removed from that extreme poverty line. That's the situation on the ground today. As we look at the various, I'll call it large-scale commercial certifications, almost all of them do pay a premium to the farmer. The farmer premiums are on the order of anywhere from 10 to as much as 15, even 20%. Some of that often goes to the co-op, not directly to the farmer, but it does go back into the origin. The challenge that we face today is the farmers need to make a lot more money. Half of today's crop, almost half, is estimated to be lost through disease, loss of soil productivity, and pests. And one of the great challenges is to breed so that we change that paradigm and allow the farmers to have more yield from the trees that they've got, healthier trees, healthier soil, healthier environment. And fine flavor cacao plays a unique role in that, because at the beginning, we start by paying dramatically higher premiums than these commercial commodity prices. In many cases, up to 2 or even 3 times these prices. So that immediately starts transforming the farmer's position. And it becomes critical when you think about that relationship. So we're done with the slides. Sean?
Ed, let me ask you a question. Is the spot price that we're talking about, that's a New York delivered price, right?
That's right. That's New York commodity market.
And so, Sarah, the one interesting thing about your question, and you know, I hope your audience has an opportunity to, you know, really almost hit the stop button on these slides that Ed has produced, because this is, I mean, these few slides are just packed full of information that is relevant, current, and really important. And so I'm thankful for Ed's work in this area, and especially in educating others. But the interesting thing about your question is it's different in different areas. For instance, what the average farmer makes that I work with in the Philippines is going to be different than what the average farmer makes that I work with in remote Tanzania. And all of the farmers that we work with, you know, if we were to go and visit with them, we'd say, hey, these are poor people. They're poor. And they're certainly, you know, within this range of the MDGs set by the United Nations. But there are degrees of poverty that we see among cocoa farmers. Like, you know, the cocoa farmers that I work with in Ecuador would have a different degree of poverty than the others that I mentioned in the Philippines and in Tanzania. The thing is, though, we have to you know, look at these basic questions of sustainability in terms of access to medical care, food, housing, and education. And these are the things that we need to find ways to support those infrastructures, because we know, and we work in women's empowerment issues, the farmer group that we work with in the Philippines is led by a woman. We support a school there where, in the Empowered Girls Project, because we know that if we can educate women entrepreneurs, that it will do wonders for the economic infrastructure of a country. And so we, as people in the industry, in the chocolate industry, in small ways and in big ways, need to find ways to support that infrastructure. And if we can support that infrastructure, there's going to be a greater incentive for farmers to want to make more money. The other thing about your question that's interesting is this. If I were to take just somebody randomly on the street here to this place in Tanzania and they were to look at their straw home with a dirt floor, they would just, they'd probably be very moved. They might be in tears, and they might say to themselves, "Oh gosh, I've got to do something to help these people get out of this. They can't. This is just terrible. It's bad." But you know what? My experience is not as vast as Ed's in this regard, but in my anecdotal experience, I've never seen such joy among people who have so little. And so I think we should be careful about thinking that just because they can make more money and buy a bass boat or something or a second home, that they will be happier and more joyful. What we want to do is contribute to their joy and their well-being in the way that's meaningful to them, what they want, not what I want or you want, or it's what they want. But we know there are some very basic things that we have to do. We have to be careful that industrial chocolate does not, how can I say this politically correct? We have to be super vigilant that industrial chocolate, under the guise of looking good and selling more chocolate bars, that they do not perpetuate poverty at just a low-grade level that's acceptable to the world public consuming chocolate bars. Did that make sense? Do you see what I mean?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
We have to be careful.
One of the things I think you said just now, Sean, in your discussion has to do with the role of women. On a global scale, women are clearly underrepresented as farmers, as equal contributors in the cocoa supply chain. And Sean, there is something that has impressed me for a long time that you do. I know Askinosie Chocolate does a profit sharing thing with your farmers, and I've always been very much impressed by the story of when you do take the check down to present it to the farmers in the group that you're getting your beans from. I've been very impressed at how you make that happen, that who you insist come together. Could you describe that for our audience just a little bit?
Yes. We have always requested that the spouses of the farmers come, that both husband and wife are present when we share profits and distribute cash, so that they both, how should I say, have an understanding of what's available to the household. And
transparency.
Exactly, transparency. You want to talk about open book management? There, it's at its finest level, right there.
But that kind of thing is what becomes critical, because cocoa farming is not it can be a large enterprise, and we're starting to see some of those emerge in Ecuador, certainly in Brazil, a little bit in Nicaragua, some in Colombia. However, the world over, cocoa farming today is a small family enterprise. And what needs to happen is we need to move it from being just a male-dominated practice to truly being a complete family enterprise, because only then are we going to have families making all of the necessary decisions on how this money should be spent as it's coming in, decisions on the proper role of the children in the family. There are some people that say they don't ever want to see a child on a cocoa farm. I disagree with that. My wife and I have 6 children. We have had family gardens. Our children have worked in our family garden. It's called after school and weekends. And sometimes we stay up late at night and we've shelled peas. In the same sense, I've seen families, extended families, drawn together around a pile of cocoa pods. Mom and dad are opening the pods with the machetes or the clubs, but younger children are scooping the pulp out with the seeds. And an older kid that I saw in Colombia came along shortly after I put the camera away and took these great big heavy buckets of pulp and beans over to the ferment box. And he was a strapping 18-year-old. He just finished playing 2 football games, soccer games, and he hauled those buckets off. More to it. He's good to be 18. That's a great age to haul 2 heavy buckets.
Well, I think that's an important point, because we hear a lot about quote child labor or slave labor, and I have not I have seen what Ed just described. I think what he described is fine. I worked on my grandparents' farm. I baled hay. Did I get paid very much? No, but it was a good experience. And there are problems with this issue that I'm told are in some cases in West Africa. I've not seen it in the Philippines, Honduras, or Ecuador, or in East Africa and Tanzania. I haven't seen it. However, because we know that the consuming public is aware of this issue and there's a lot of discussion about it, and they think, because of misinformation, that all chocolate is subject to child slave labor, and we all know here that that's not the case. But in Africa, we put an addendum on our contract in Swahili based on the Flotrans International Labor Organization standards, which Ed just described, about making sure that the kids are, number one, if young family members are going to be there, that they're safe, that they're going to school, that they're being educated, and that there aren't too many hours on the farm. And those are reasonable practices, I think, for teenagers and young people to work on family farms. It's what we've seen all over the world for millennia, and I think that's okay.
There's a particular element of this, there's a particular element of this that becomes very important. When we talk about the fine chocolate industry, the majority of these companies are focused on this relationship purchasing that Sean's business follows. The nice thing about it is you go there. You spend time on the farm, not just drive by or drive through and run away, but it's like Sean spending time overnight. Sean is taking the high school kids to the farms in Tanzania. He's not taking high school kids to just farms. He's taking high school kids to visit his friends. These are his friends. He knows these people. Many of the fine chocolate manufacturers, they know the farmers. They are friends with them. They are part of an extended, I'll call it, business family. When you have this kind of business dealing, the likelihood of having inappropriate child involvement in the work is very, very low. When you get fairly distant through the supply chain so that you have no idea who the suppliers are, you know there are farmers, the likelihood of things happening increases literally in any country, although the African situation does present more challenges because the growing countries, Ivory Coast, Ghana, are bordered by Burkina Faso and Mali, and sometimes the living conditions can be tragic, to say the least, in those countries. And so going to a cocoa-producing country can be very attractive to some of them if that's their only option.
So where we don't have the transparency, which is something that Sean works with, that's where we can raise the question and really not have a certainty unless we know the producers, such as Sean, who has that relationship. Sean, tell us a little bit more about the Chocolate University. You guys have talked a little bit about it, but not really mentioned it. So can you introduce that to us?
Sure. Chocolate University was designed to engage the children of our neighborhood and of our factory, kind of a poorer neighborhood. We have an elementary school program, we have a middle school program, and a high school program to teach them about not just chocolate making, but about business and how small business can make a difference in the world. And the thing that takes the most of my time is the high school program. It's juniors and seniors in high school, a very competitive program to be part of. And we choose half of the students are private pay, the other half are full scholarship. We raise the money to let them be part of this program. They spend a week in the dorms in a nearby college campus and learn about business and learn about our business, and they learn Swahili and Tanzania culture and history. They go home and they pack for a day, and then we take them to Tanzania.
Wow.
And we raise that money from tours at our factory, and then there are donors around the country who share my passion that exposing young people to this experience can change the world in some ways small, in some ways big. But it really is very impactful. One student on our first trip, this is a 17-year-old young man, sent a text message home to his mom, and he said, "This is the best day of my life." I'll never forget that.
That's amazing.
And it was really moving for me and gratifying. And so this Chocolate University thing is something that's really grown over the years. And as I said, this is our third trip. We'll be leaving in 2 weeks, and we have all sorts of programs and important things to do while we're there working with the farmers that Ed mentioned a moment ago.
So a couple of the things that I really like hearing you guys talk about is in business there's the concept of the shareholders. So you work in business to satisfy the shareholder, not the need, but what they get into the business for. But what you guys are talking about is really looking at all the stakeholders. So the relationships, the community, your employees. And I think one of the things that I'd be interested in hearing, Sean, from your initiatives in your business is what sort of difficulties you have found in communicating them to your investors, maybe to your employees, to your customers even, and how you do so.
I don't have any investors, but there are total 15 employees, so we're small, and it's a family business. And this is important because I am a very emotional, passionate guy, always have been, and I am about these issues that we've been talking about for the last 30 minutes or so. And so I have to be super careful that I'm not overimposing my view, even on my employees and the people who lead the company with me. It's important that they share my views. And really, we've kind of matured on this issue, and the example for that is I used to really fret about the notion that an employee might not share my passion, say, for the Philippines, or even a family member, who might say, hey, we need to focus on the business. Don't forget about that. Why are you worried about this water well, in Tanzania? Well, here's what's happened. Business is messy. It's often not pretty. And I've come to sort of embrace that. And here's why. I used to say, well, which is more important, the quality of our chocolate or the social justice that we find to be so important to our daily lives? And if I were to ask you, Sarah, what you think is most important to us, you'd probably say, well, they're both important. They are both important. This is what we've most recently come to realize. If we're going to have a tug of war between those two things, the quality of the product is going to win. It will win. And the reason is because if it doesn't win, then our business is not sustainable. It's why I don't like Tom's shoes. You don't buy Tom's shoes because they're some high-quality, beautiful, hand-stitched Italian shoes. You buy it because it says Tom's and because they're going to give another pair of shoes to a child somewhere that they will eventually outgrow or sell in the black market, but that's another story. And so eventually, to me, that model fails. It looks pretty good right now. I will say, yes, it looks pretty good right now. And it'll probably look good for the time being. But I think for a company to go to be for generations and generations, if you want to be socially responsible and all that, that's fine. But you better make sure that your business is sound, that you've got a great product and that people love it and that it tastes good. And so I've become content with the fact that some employees may feel more strongly one way than others, and I'm okay with that. And so as far as communicating it, I let my employees know that, that it's okay. And that's, that's what we're hoping for in our employees, to have a viewpoint and to have an opinion about that.
I'm afraid that I come down on the quality side every time. If you don't find the best beans possible, part of all that the god Quetzalcoatl has bequeathed to mankind, and then transform them, each bean, according to its own need. I remember the U.S. Army phrase, be all that you can be. If that bean is not being all that it can be, then we've done our customers, the people that are at the end of this entire fabulous, marvelous, messy, and somewhat chaotic at times supply chain. If we don't satisfy their needs, then we have cheated them, and we can't do that. Chocolate is ephemeral, just as the music in a concert hall is ephemeral. You are in the moment with it, and when it's finished, it's gone. You can, fortunately, with chocolate, repeat that experience anytime you want.
Well, that leads us to a very good question, and we do have to wrap up because we're running out of time. But in the past few years, we have read that the future of chocolate is uncertain due to unmatched supply in the cocoa industry for an increasing global demand for chocolate. So will there be a shortage of fine flavor cacao plantations in the near future? And in both your opinions, what will happen to chocolate supply throughout the world? Can we enjoy it later on?
Well, as you look at the global supply, there is no question we are in a period where it has to grow and grow dramatically. If you look at the BRICS, so-called BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, it is either growing or poised to grow dramatically. Dark chocolate today is growing in China at double-digit numbers. So it's really significant. It's where the whole global, the large players are focused. In that light, there have been estimates that 10 years, I guess in 2000, it was estimated that by 2010, by 2020, we would need 1 million more metric tons than the 4.2 million annual crop. That may not be the exact right number. I don't think that we're going to be 1 million tons short, but we are running some shortfalls this year, not as much as originally projected, thanks to some bumper crops. Farmers are becoming a little bit more aware of their yields as the price has gone up. Several years ago, the price, instead of being today's 3,100 plus, was something like 2,400. And so the price makes a difference in that market. That said, while the supply has to grow, and it is very clear that breeding has to occur for yields and disease resistance to help the farmers, the critical element is that we can't do to the cacao crop what mankind has done to tomatoes, strawberries, and long-stem roses, lose the reason that we had them in the first place, which for cacao is the flavor and the diversity of the flavors that are there. So my answer is, it ain't happening on my shift.
Well, yeah, and that's why Ed Seguine needs to be appointed by the United Nations as the Undersecretary of Breeding for Taste.
Well,
Seriously,
I mean, the ICO Fine Flavor Committee.
Well, and that's this. hey folks, we've talked about a lot of important stuff, but if this doesn't happen, what Ed just talked about, I mean, then maybe I will make shoes, because I mean, this is super, super important. This is kind of the crux of the whole thing. And while I really don't know what I'm talking about in this particular area, because I'm kind of like the scuba diver focused on one area of the reef. I don't really know right now what the entire reef looks like. Ed does. I mean, Ed is flying at that altitude where he has an understanding of the world supply and the intricacies that he's talking about. But if we don't elevate the significance of what Ed's message is here on taste and breeding for taste industrially, it will not happen. I mean, look, I buy 4 or 5 containers of beans a year. The industrial chocolate makers in the United States might go through that in an hour. So if and when you compare that relativity, it won't be me. It's got to be the industrial folks who are moving the needle. I mean, literally moving the needle in the cocoa world. They have to come to this recognition that taste must be important, and if they don't, then we're all screwed, really. I mean,
I think though that the fine chocolate makers play a highly disproportionate role to their market share, and that role is there is a buzz and an interest among consumers. There is certainly a consistent media buzz with fine chocolate itself, and that buzz, to me, has the potential for keeping all of this alive. Left on its own, economics may purely drive it, but I think that we're in a position where the fine chocolate makers of the world, and this is in Europe as well as the US, as well as fine chocolate makers springing up in origin countries now, these are the folks that drive the notion that flavor matters, flavor counts, and they talk to their friends. They're usually the ones that are socially very active.
I strongly agree with you, Ed.
That's why I've trademarked bean all you can bean. He said it, Ed said it, just while we've been online. I've just trademarked it, so don't anybody try to use it. I'm putting it on a t-shirt.
That's great.
I want a t-shirt.
That's great. I want a t-shirt too. Please send that to us. Well, on that note, I want to close with a very special thank you to our guest chocolate maker, Sean Askinosi from Askinosi Chocolate.
Thank you.
And to our guest chocolate expert, Ed Seguine from Cacao, Cocoa, and Chocolate Advisors consultant to Guitar Chocolate Company. For taking time out. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days and to join in on this very important conversation about cacao, cocoa, and the chocolate sustainability. And I hope we can continue this. This has been a very wonderful conversation full of information that we need to know. So thanks for watching, and to access a copy of this video later, please go to www.ecolechocolate.com. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.